Hey everyone, Chris Stegall here with MK Partners, joined once again by Matt Kaufman. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Chris. Happy to be here.
Awesome, thanks for hopping on. And today we are taking a look at a important part of the app management cycle as an app developer on the Salesforce AppExchange, pushing updates to an app that's already out in the ecosystem.
Yeah. We've talked about the AppExchange and looked at some of the apps that are on there before, but we've never really talked about, well, how did they get there? And once they get there, how do they get updated when the world changes or when the technology changes? And so I've published a couple different apps over the years. And today we're going to go through the motions of making some changes to one and then pushing those changes to the AppExchange so that the next time someone goes to install it, they would get the latest version.
Cool.
Yeah. So I brought up a little Trailhead module that I've done before. If you haven't done it, I recommend doing it. It's a good one. It talks about application lifecycle. What that means is basically the stages or the process that we go through when we're building an application. And then it even gets into the ways to deploy it, the different options that are available. And so today we're looking at packages. But if you do this module, you can, and this is actually a whole trail, in fact. If you do this, you can learn about change sets. You can learn about the org development model, which is basically using sandboxes and deploying the sandboxes to production. And then you can also learn about the package development model, which is typically how AppExchange apps are built, using the package development model. Now, even with packages, there's a couple different options. So if you're just developing for yourself internally, or if you're doing something different than AppExchange, there are what's called unmanaged packages. And those are basically open. So that means that once they're installed, the person who installed it, they can change the stuff that was in the package. So they could delete a field or rename a field or an object or whatever may be in that package. They can actually go through that and make changes to it. And so those are unmanaged packages. And then there's also managed packages, which is the opposite. So if I install a managed package, I can't change the things that are in that package. And then there's this added bonus for the publisher or the developer that the code inside that package is not visible to the installer. And so you could hide or protect your intellectual property by building a managed package instead of an unmanaged package. So then it gets even more complex. So back in the day, there was just this thing called the managed package, and that was that. And then Salesforce came out with this thing called second generation managed packages. And so because we have a thing called second generation managed packages, we now have a thing called first generation managed packages too. Similar to guitars, right? We used to only have guitars, but now we have electric guitars and acoustic guitars. Same thing with watches. We used to only have analog watches, but now we call them watches. And then now we have digital watches and analog watches, and we have smart watches too. And there's a couple other examples like that I learned in college that are fun.
It might have been pocket watches first.
That's true.
Those were watches, and then the wristwatch.
And before pocket watches, there were these huge clocks that people carried around on their ships. Actually, they would put them on a ship, and they had to make sure that they would keep time properly so they knew how long they were at sea. But anyway, enough about linguistic jokes. So we have this thing called first generation packages and second generation packages. Now, first generation is what we're going to look at today. It's the one that most people who have been doing this for a long time are familiar with. I think we'll end up doing second generation packages in another video. Second generation is very exciting because it's a source-driven packaging kind of process. And in general, it's a best practice to leverage tools like Git and GitHub or GitLab or something like that, some type of repository, to keep track of your work as you're working on it. And so the natural next step would be, well, wait a minute, why don't we just incorporate the packaging process into that process as well, into the source control? And so that's what 2GP is all about. The 1GP, the first generation packages, are it's a separate process. You do your work, maybe you're using GitHub, maybe you're not, and then you go and you do something to upload to the AppExchange. So it's two separate processes, and unfortunately, it means that you also need to pay close attention, because if you're not paying attention, you could sometimes accidentally publish something before it really was ready, or publish something before you had downloaded the full thing that needs to be published. And that has happened many times to me, and I'm sure to others also. So I'm very excited about 2GP packages, or second generation packages. It's just not something we're going to talk about today. Today, we're going to talk about the original packaging, which is these managed packages that can be uploaded to the AppExchange using a user interface. And so it's not something that's programmatic or automated. It's all very human driven. And so all of this begins inside a Salesforce org. So I'm going to go to a Salesforce org right now. And this is what we call it's a developer org. And it's the org where we built this app. So it's the packaging org, where we built the custom code or custom fields or objects, whatever it may be, that we have designated as an application. And so this is the development org for Photo Uploader, one of our apps that's been around for over a decade. The code for the org for the app sits in this org. So we don't give away the password to this org. We don't let a lot of people have access to this org. But every time that we want to make a change to the application on how it works or how it looks, we have to go to this org. We have to make the change, and then we can upload that package. We create the package and upload it to the AppExchange. So here's the org, and here we can see the apps over here on the right-hand side. I'm going to go ahead and just give a quick demonstration. I think this will work. There we go. It's uploading a picture, and there's my picture. And that's basically how it works. And this is free for anyone to use on the AppExchange. So that's why it is so simple. But I made some changes to the app earlier this week, and I now need to upload those to the AppExchange. So we're going to go through the motions. I probably won't do it, live, because it does sometimes take a little time for the spinner to spin. But we can at least go through the screens and see what that process looks like. So I've already gone and set up. I've added fields. I've changed code. I've done whatever I need to do so that this live instance of Salesforce, this packaging instance or developer org, has the up-to-date code. That's the most important thing for the first generation packaging. And you can see here, because I've already created the package the first time, it shows up here. If I had never published this app before, I would have to hit the new button, and I'll just kind of go through the motions, but I won't do it, to create the package. And the package is really just a concept. So we're saying it's a bundle, right? So I could create a package called, Super Duper App, and it doesn't mean anything until I go in, and I'll jump back real quick, and I start adding components to the package. And this is very similar to a change set. And so for those of us who are familiar with change sets, this is a very similar concept. I'm adding things to the package, just like I would add things to a change set. And you can see here, I can click the add button, and it lets me browse. I mean, honestly, these are like the same screens as the change set for those of you who are familiar with it. And let me browse all the stuff that's in this org, and I can add stuff. Now, I don't want to add anything that's not going to be part of the app, because you can't really take stuff out. And this is one of the big differences between the 1GP and 2GP options. 2GP is a little more flexible. There's some availability to deprecate things in a 1GP package, but it's very limited. And it used to be not existent at all. So that's why 2GP is available now, and that's why if we actually go back a screen, let's come back real quick. You'll see here Salesforce is like really marketing, hey, maybe you want to do this with a 2GP option. Let me see if I can zoom in there. So they're really pushing that. And then you can see that comparison sheet that we looked at earlier. Now, someone might say, well, Matt, you've got this older package here. Why don't you just convert it to second generation? And the answer is, I would love to. but there's been a pilot program for a couple of years now for publishers and developers to test the transition from a first generation package to a second generation package. That pilot is not for general availability use. It's only a pilot. You can test it, you can give feedback. It's been a couple of years. And so I'm waiting for it to be generally available. I'm hoping it will be soon. We keep kind of getting hints that it'll be soon, but it's already been a couple of years, so we'll see. But as soon as it's available and it's generally available, then yes, the plan is to switch all of our first generation packages over to second generation ones and be able to take advantage of the source control and other options. So I've added any components that I needed to add using the add. We can see here past versions. This is kind of nice. Let's see if I can click on that, if it will work. There we go. So we can see all of our past versions. So these are previous uploads that I've done of the app. And in general, you see it as a deprecate button, but it's very hard to actually deprecate stuff once it's out in the wild. So you want to make sure that you get things right the first time when you upload it. And if you upload it and you made a mistake before you get it out in the wild, before you let people install it, that's the right time to deprecate or do another release and then hopefully fix the mistake. But like I said, it's very hard to take things away once you've added it and once they're out there. And you can see some other stuff about this app here. Patch organization. So this is one that I'm trying to spin up right now. So when we look at the versions, there's what we call a major release and a minor release. So you can see here a major release. And so a major release is typically meaning that the package has changed in terms of what the files are in it. Now you can make a major release for whatever reason you want, but in general, if you want to add files to a package, it has to be part of a major release. And we do major releases by clicking on this upload button here. So every time I click on this upload button, it's going to start the upload process for a major release. And what you'll notice is this number here changed from 2.0 to 2.1, and that's indicative of a major release. As opposed to a patch would be something like this. And so you see it's the third number, actually, not the second, the third number that's changing. And so that would be a patch release or a minor release that we'd be doing with that. I'll go through the motions. We're not going to click upload, but we'll at least go through this form and kind of look at what's involved. So the first thing is the version name. And you can see the example of Spring 2023. This is going to show up in a couple places. It's going to show up when your customer installs the app. They're going to see it. But it'll also show up in your Salesforce, the publisher Salesforce. So every publisher of an AppExchange app gets this. I'm going to use the word app again, but unfortunately, we're going to use the word app a lot. It gets an app called the License Management App that Salesforce provides to publishers. And it's a really cool app because you install it in your Salesforce as a publisher or developer, and it synchronizes with the AppExchange behind the scenes. So you'll have a record in your Salesforce for this package and this package version. And so you want to put something meaningful in here so that when you see that record in your Salesforce, you're going to know what it is. If you just put 2.1, it's going to be really hard, unless you only have one app, to know what that was. So typically, you want to have some type of time frame. And so that's why they recommend having something like Spring 2023, which of course right now we're actually in winter 2024. And then I usually also put something like that in there, which is the version number. Because I'm probably going to have a couple versions during the winter 2024 release cycle. I might fix something in a week that I discovered a typo or a bug. And I might do that again for multiple weeks. And so I usually want to put that in there. And it just makes it that much easier if a customer reaches out saying, oh, I installed your app and I'm having a problem. You don't have to necessarily say, well, what day did you install? And let me go figure out if I can determine which version you actually have. You also don't tell them, oh, just upgrade. You probably have an old version, right? So the more specific you can be in your naming convention, the easier it'll be to kind of determine, is this something you need to investigate or is this something that you've already fixed, and make it easier to also convey that information from customers to you and vice versa. So usually I do something like this. Sometimes I'll even go all the way like that. And that way, everything I need is in the version name. And so when I see this record in my Salesforce, it's all there. And then it's nice also if I want to create validation rules or formula fields or flows, I don't necessarily need to look at the package and the package version. I could just look at the package version and say if the name includes photo uploader or contains photo uploader. And so usually I like to kind of put everything in there and have a very long name. The version number itself is just the numbers. Next, so the release type. Okay, so this is really important. And if you do the application lifecycle management trail or some of the other trails that are on Trailhead about developing apps, you'll learn the difference between an actual release, or when you are deploying it to production, versus a beta release, which is only available for Sandbox and DevOrgs. And so, from a process perspective, it's a best practice to always test things before you release them. I say it like it's common sense, but unfortunately it's not. And I think a lot of us are used to being really dangerous with Salesforce because it's so easy to just make changes. But it's a best practice to always test things. And so one of the features that the AppExchange and the packaging functionality includes is the ability to create a beta release. And then you can go and install that in your DevOrgs, in your sandboxes, test it out. And if it doesn't work, entirely deprecate that beta release, and you don't have to worry about including something in there that you wish you didn't include. So when we go back to that screen that we were on a little earlier with the versions, I had mentioned it's really hard to remove things from packages, but you can remove things from when it's a beta. You cannot remove things as easily when it's released. So it's always the best practice to first publish it as a beta, test it out. If there's problems, publish it again as a beta. And you keep doing that until it's perfect. And then you publish it as a released, managed release type. And you're kind of locking things in stone at that point. Next. Okay, so this is just a couple descriptive things that you can include in the listing. So it's always a good practice to have the list of changes in this release that were not part of the last release. So we fixed these 3 bugs, we added this functionality, et cetera, et cetera. And ideally you have that on some URL on a web page on the internet, something like that, right? If you want to be really clever, technically you could host this page in Salesforce. You could also host it on GitHub. You could host it on your actual website. It's all up to you. But it's a good practice. And we have been asked before by installers saying, well, what's the difference between this release and the last release? And I don't want to have to compose an email listing all the things we fixed. It's so much nicer when I can just be like, it's on the release notes page. Why don't you check it out? And I say it with a smile, of course. And now this part is really cool. So post-install instructions. Unfortunately, most people don't even pay attention when they install apps, right? We all do this where we just click, yeah, I agree, I just want to get to it. We have the I agree as part of the AppExchange install process. But at the end, once it's done, we actually have this other screen that pops up. Inside that install screen, there's like a little window, an iframe that pops up, and it'll actually show content that the publisher wants you to see when you install. And that's the post-install instructions. And so you can either store those on your website, and in which case that little iframe will show your website. You could also put it into a Visualforce page, and then the iframe will show that Visualforce page. What's cool about doing it with a Visualforce page, if that Visualforce page is part of the package, which it has to be, you can actually have functionality in the Visualforce page to start the configuration process. And so you would immediately go from install to configure. And that's how we used to do things a lot. We don't really use Visualforce that much anymore. So now most of the time we're just pointing to a page on our website that has instructions. But it was really cool back in the day where the last step of the install was the configuration.
So it would be the configure like in their org, the setup and like the.
Right. We would include a Visualforce page called configure photo uploader or configure app name. And that would be the page that they would go to. And it would basically just continue this process. You've gone through the AppExchange install. Now the next step is to select your record type and give us your credit card number because we're going to charge you, things like that. And that would all be built into the app, which was really cool. You can still do this. You could build a Visualforce page that maybe has an LWC inside it, and so that way you're not necessarily spending a lot of time developing with Visualforce. But we just kind of moved away from it. And we keep the packages lighter, have less stuff in it, and just point people to instructions on the website instead. And then from there, we can update those instructions anytime. That was another issue, is like this visual first page is part of the package.
Right.
So every time we want to tweak it, we actually have to go and update the package. And that's hard. So instead, point it to the website. We can update our website 1,000 times a day, and no one knows that we did it.
Yeah.
So it's a little easier from a developer perspective.
And when you were doing the version name and the version or the package type, the release or beta, so if I'm testing this, and so I do it in beta, I have a few clients try it out, I get my feedback, everything looks good, so now I'm ready to wide release. Is that then a new version, or is it the same version, but I just switch that radio button from beta to wide?
So you would re-upload. It technically is a new version from a database perspective, right? So we'd have a new record in our database for the version. The numbers can be the same.
Okay.
Right? Although between you, me, and everybody watching, when I do a beta, I will usually put the word B or beta or something in here, the letter B, because, again, I'm going to have this in a database, and I want to keep track. And if I'm going to have 6 beta versions, they can't all be named 2.1. That's not good. Right. So you want to have something else that tells you which one it is. It can be up here in the name, it can be down here in the version, but somewhere I need a way to keep track of this. Otherwise, I mean, there technically is an ID, right? And that ID is a Salesforce ID, but everyone knows what that looks like. It's 18 characters. It's not going to be fun to try to figure out which one's installed and stuff like that. So yeah, it technically is. And you start the process all over. There's no way to promote a beta to release. You have to actually do it again, which, again, going back to what I was saying earlier about the 1GP thing, it's a very human-driven process. And so it's definitely more likely to have human errors because of it. And I've made more than I can remember where I thought I was doing it the exact same way that I did it yesterday, and I made a slight difference, and something went wrong. This is one of those things where you want to document your process. You want to, like, for instance, things like this description. I'll usually keep the description in a Word doc. I'll keep the URL to our release notes page in a Word doc and post installation URL, and that way I can just copy paste. I don't need to go look for it. And I can even say, okay, this is the naming convention, because you don't want to have the naming convention flip-flop every release. That's kind of weird. So I try to have this all standardized in a little cheat sheet that I can reference.
Cool.
Down here, this is an interesting feature of managed packages in general. We don't really use this too much for packages we're uploading to the AppExchange. But if you were to create a managed package that you are going to publish to the world and say, hey, everybody, you can use it if you want, you technically can lock the package so that upon install, they have to enter a password. And if they don't have it, they don't get to use it. They don't get to install it even. And so this is a way of kind of bypassing the AppExchange, saying, look, I'm going to give it away, but you got to talk to me if you want to unlock it. The problem is there's only one password, and word can get out pretty easily what the password is. And then you lose that ability to restrict people from installing. And then finally down here, this is calculated. So you can see I cannot change this. So when we upload the package, when we choose all of the things that are in it, there's this field, there's that field. If anything in that package, in this kind of bundle, is calculated to need a feature of Salesforce, it'll automatically be checked. But you can, as the publisher or developer, also say, no, this is a package that's meant to be used by people who are using Salesforce with campaigns, right? Which is possible. Maybe you're building some type of marketing tool. So even if the package itself doesn't require campaigns in the org to be there, you could still come in here and say, if you don't have campaigns in your Salesforce because you are using some weird addition, you're not allowed to use this app. You're not allowed to even install it. And so you can do that. In general, I try the opposite. I don't want anything checked. I want as many people to install my apps as possible. But if you build something very specific that integrates with campaigns or with orders or whatever it may be, then it would make sense to come in here and check off the things that are required, even if the code or the things in the package don't necessarily say they're required. And then same thing down below. We just looked at features of Salesforce, but even objects can be specific too. So campaigns is both a feature and an object. That one's kind of unique. but some of these are not features. They're just, objects that are in the database. And so if you know that you need one of these objects to be included and available in this org, otherwise your app is kind of not going to be useful, then you can come in here and check this off. And upon installation, if it's not included in the org, the install will fail. And so you won't get any of those reviews that say, I installed this, and then I realized it doesn't even work with my org. What a terrible app. And you're like, well, but it's a great app for people who do have campaigns,
That
So
was my first thought when you said, I want as many people to install it as possible. And I went, except if they're going to leave a bad review.
right, yeah.
So
So this is a way of kind of preventing those bad reviews, or at least preventing bad reviews from people who actually install.
Yeah.
Right. Technically, anyone can go in there and just be like, I've never used this app, but here's what I think of it.
Yeah.
But that's going to be a less reliable review, hopefully less credible review than one where someone's like, yeah, I installed it, I tested it for 2 weeks, and this is what I think. So I'm going to back out because I'm not going to actually upload this because it will become a real version, although I guess it would be beta. The process also is somewhat time consuming. It could take, usually the upload itself says it's done fairly quickly, like within a minute, but the package is not available for installation or for linking to the AppExchange for sometimes even a half hour.
Okay.
So there's this dissemination process from my org to the AppExchange and the places where it can be installed, and that can take a while. So let me just cancel out real quick. All right, so while we're in there, ready to go. Okay, so I said I would come back to this page, so I'm going to come back to it real quick. So here's those version pages, and so you can see I've only done major versions this whole time. So you can see they're all major releases. Here's the beta, you can see there, and I put in parentheses that it was a beta. That does not count as a release. So we have a 1.7 here, we also have a 1.7 there. It's okay to have two numbers the same as long as one of them is beta or multiple are beta. But the next release that I want to do is actually going to be 2.0.1, which is going to be a patch release. And so patch releases are not done in the packaging org. They're done in the patch org. And the process is the exact same. We're just going to do it from there instead. So we're not going to go through that today. But what you can see here is that I have an org here called a patch org. And you create a patch org per major release. So this patch org is only for the 2.0 release. And I can make as many patch versions as I want, 2.0.1, 2.0.2, 2.0.357, right? Whatever I want, I can do. At some point, logically, it probably makes sense to jump to 2.1. Or if I ever need to add more components to the release, I can't do that from a patch. Patches are only changing what's already in the package, not adding or taking away things from a package. And so that's kind of also like a technical barrier when you're going to have to go to a new major release. So to do a patch, I would log into the patch org, and then this same screen is going to show up there, and it's going to just have fewer options because I can't add anything. All I can do is that upload screen. And it would let me basically walk through this exact same screen saying, okay, you've changed some of the components, some of the code or the fields in this org. Now you can upload them again. And we would have 2.0.1 and upload it. And then at that point, I would see it back in both places, basically. I'd see it in the patch org, but I would also see it in the packaging org. So they're linked behind the scenes. Salesforce takes care of that linking for us. And then on another call, we can talk about the final step, which we won't do today, which is actually publishing it. So when you upload it, it becomes a package that can be installed, and it has a unique URL that you can give away to people if you want to. And we saw that that's where you could also lock it with that password. But that doesn't automatically put it on the AppExchange. There's a whole nother process to publish things on the AppExchange, and there's a security review, which is outside of our control. That's something that's done by Salesforce. But there's a listing that where you can say, this is my logo, this is my business name and description, and all that kind of stuff. So that's an additional process. And I think the big takeaway from what we've been talking about today and some of the things we've talked about in the past is all this stuff takes time, and you want to do it slowly to make sure you get it right. So even though those of us who are familiar with Salesforce know that we can make changes really quickly. To then publish and distribute those changes as like an app on the AppExchange, it really takes a lot longer than you would expect. And it's gotten better over the years. I remember my first app, I think it took like 6 months to get it published. And so now we're probably talking closer to 3 months to get something published, including the security review time, but it does vary to time of year and stuff like that. So if you're planning on launching a new business or anything like that, you got to plan far ahead, and not just think that you'll be out the door tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think on the flip side of that, one of the things that I really like and appreciate about you showing us this is that I think it's not super intuitive just how much of this would live inside a Salesforce org and like a dev org.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like this kind of visibility hopefully gets some admins realizing that they could also be publishing apps, because it's not a pure, let me look at a black screen covered in green matrixy code falling through. It's like, oh, it's a setup page. I've seen screens like this in Salesforce. It kind of looks like classic over Lightning, but it's the kind of thing that if you're comfortable in a dev org doing trailheads, you're 50% of the way there to being an app developer on the AppExchange.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think about that. But if you're going to stick with the 1GP model, you have all the skills already, right?
Yeah.
If you're a Salesforce admin or developer, you have all the skills needed to publish it. It's just, like I said, time consuming. But it's all point and click. And like I said, I think the change set screen was actually modeled after this, if not, based on it, because they're so similar. And so I know a lot of admins are familiar with change sets, and so you could do this. And you can start. What I would recommend is starting in a dev org that you could throw away. Don't start in a dev org that is like the most important org you have. Start and get used to this process with something that doesn't matter. And then once you're comfortable with it and you understand all the screens and how things work, then you go and you build your real product and get it perfect.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for hopping on today and walking us through that. I know that the existing documentation online is a little bit slim for all of that. So hopefully somebody finds this and it helps you get your app up on the AppExchange or updated more quickly than it would have without.
Yeah.
Cool. And next time, like you said, we will dive more in depth into patch orgs and then ultimately the publishing process for the AppExchange. So if you're watching, thank you, and do be sure to like and subscribe so you'll see those videos. And once again, thanks, Matt, for hopping on and demystifying some of this behind the curtain Salesforce stuff for us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.